And the place to begin with so much emotion is to remind ourselves of the need to be balanced, to be centered, to look at the world in a big way, so as not to be drawn inextricably toward pain and fear. An unanticipated dimension of the horror of this week as we mourned the 11 who were murdered last Saturday, for me, for many, is the appreciation of the gift of America to us as Jews. In many ways, it was something that I, and perhaps you, to some degree took for granted. The place of safety of life in America. The country that took in many of us, parents, grandparents, to provide a land of freedom, of opportunity. By a show of hands, how many in this room have a grandparent who was an immigrant to America? Keep your hands up. And how many of you have a parent? Keep your hands up. How many of you have a parent who was an immigrant? And how many of you were immigrants? Overwhelmingly, the hands are up in this room. We represent the Jews of America. We are immigrants who came to this country. But more, that is America. And that's America's greatness. This is a country founded largely by white men, Protestant men. Protestant white men who, in the creating of a new experiment of government, could proclaim at the beginning of the Bill of Rights, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Do you know what was the first country in world history to give the right to vote to Jews? What would you guess? First country to ever give rights to Jews to be participants in a democracy with their voices counted. The United States of America. First country. And we have risen as the country has grown. In some ways, that's what made last Saturday so shocking. That Jews could be attacked in a place of worship. Part of me said, and this may upset some of you, why not the Jews? After all, who hasn't been shot in mass murders in America in recent years? It's children in their schools. It's country western fans at a country western concert. It's blacks in their churches. It's Muslims in their mosques. Why should we be safe in a country that is sick with violence? This is not the sermon to talk about the nature of that violence. But I will tell you, we have no more mental illness in America in percentage than other countries. And we have a lot more violence. Separate sermon. Back to celebrating America. I had the privilege to be recently in New York as part of our Jewish tour. And on that tour, we visited the American Jewish Historical Society that has many remarkable documents. And among those documents that I was able to look this close at was the poem, The New Colossus, written by Emma Lazarus, with her own handwriting of her having written it out. That's, of course, the poem that appears on the Statue of Liberty. But I didn't know some of the back story to that poem, which has become a symbol in many ways in its own right of the distinctive idea that is America. The idea that America is a refuge for people in need. She, Emma Lazarus, was born in New York City to an affluent Sephardic family, and she already in her early years displayed this prodigy talent for poetry, writing a published book of poems in her teens while yet in high school. She would become friends with the great poets of her day. Sadly, she would die from what we now know as Hodgkin's disease at the age of 38. But as a young woman, and this is in the middle of the 19th century, she would live from 1849 to 1887, Jews were arriving from Eastern Europe, to the first wave of Jews from Eastern Europe, and it was controversial. They were uneducated largely in terms of trades, didn't speak English, and the established Jews in America were a bit embarrassed by them. And there was controversy in America in terms of this new immigrant people and whether they were worthy of America. In her visitation with Eastern European Jewish refugees, she began to develop a yearning to understand her Judaism. And she began to translate from German into English the poems of medieval Spanish poets. She wrote an essay on Bar Kokhba, and she became a serious student of Judaism. And she continued to write poems and become well known. When the Statue of Liberty came to America, so I was explained before seeing her handwritten poem, they didn't have the money to build the base on which to put it, the pedestal. And so they had an idea of a fundraising evening in New York to try and raise a couple $100,000. And they thought it would be great to have a competition for poems that they would auction off by famous people of the day. And they would have also a competition which of these poems best reflects the nature of this gift from France. And she, at first reluctant, but inspired by the refugees, the Jewish refugees that she had been working with, wrote the poem, The New Colossus. We all know that later, as that evening event was successful and the pedestal was erected, her poem from that night was chosen as the only poem to be attached to that pedestal that became inextricably linked with Lady Liberty. Her words, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles, from her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame." Quote, "Keep ancient lands your storied pomp," cries she with silent lips. Quote, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." And so at the base of what is now in bronze, at the base of the Statue of Liberty, this tablet with her sonnet to the Barthold statue of Liberty engraved upon it is placed upon these walls in loving memory of Emma Lazarus, born in New York City, July 2nd, 1849, died November 19th, 1887. In this encyclopedia of the Jewish Encyclopedia of 1900, the first English Jewish encyclopedia, in the entry for Emma Lazarus, mind you, 1900 was its first copyright, it says, quote, regarding her, "Doubtless, she is the most distinguished literary figure produced by American Jewry." Now, we chuckle, rightly, because how much Jews contributed to America from 1900 on. The first time in this country that a man or woman was elected who was not a white Protestant male was 1960, with the election of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He had a hard time. There were those who said he will take his directions from the Pope. We can't elect a Catholic. And he gave a speech at Notre Dame, the great Catholic university, in which he said, "I am an American, and I will always do what's best for America." A very close election, and a turning point in America, a turning point in so many ways of opening not just the doors, but the Catholics and Protestants, between Jews and Muslims. One of the most moving aspects of this last week, far and wide, was the reaching out as a community, saying, "You are our brothers and our sisters." On our sign out front, somebody left yellow flowers without a note, a way of saying, "We are with you." I have taken America for granted because it's my gift. I've grown up here. It is the land of the free and the home of the brave. But all too often, I just assumed that America was what it was, and I could benefit. And so I pause for all of us to know how privileged we are to have made the choices that our grandparents, great-grandparents, parents, or we made to raise our children in this land of freedom, this land of freedom of religion, this land of freedom of the press, this land in which people are taught to respect each other. But it's, of course, not true for all. There are those who do hate. 2/3 of hate crimes that have occurred from 2001 till now, over 2/3, have not occurred by foreigners or people who are other. 2/3 have occurred by white assailants. And so many, like last Saturday, are those who want to have an America that is not the America of Emma Lazarus, that is not the America of the First Amendment. They want a white Christian America. They are but a small group. I have been so moved once again by my Christian pastor friends and Christian neighbors who joined us here on Sunday morning at our memorial. But there are those who hate, those who long to keep America the way it was when it was founded. So a little bit about how to respond and to acknowledge hate. There's a wonderful book, Thinking Fast and Slow, by Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman received the Nobel Prize in Economics. He was a Hebrew University professor in Israel who would end his career at Princeton. He won the Nobel Prize in describing how people make economic decisions. And here's two thoughts that are relevant. One is that we overreact to that which is unusually awful or good. So people go out and they buy lottery tickets because the jackpot is $1.6 billion. knowing your odds of winning are better to be hit by lightning, literally. But they put down their money because it's a dream. And you begin to imagine, oh, if I had if I had $100 million, how I would use it. And so we put down our money. That's one side of a psychological phenomenon, which is that people will put down their money even though they know there's no realistic possibility because of the what if. But it works in the opposite direction as well. When a terrorist attack occurs, and that was a domestic terrorist attack last Shabbat, when it occurs, our minds latch onto it. It's in the press. There were members of the congregation this week who said, I'm afraid to go to synagogue. I'm afraid to send my kids to religious school. There's so much danger. But the reality is, as a matter of probability, it's still very, very low. And so there's fast thinking, which is responding emotionally and reflexively, and there is slow thinking. And slow thinking means being realistic, analytic, and responsible. A synagogue like ours needs to be vigilant in security, and yet at the same time, we must be realistic and know that we are safe, because we are. Things happen. If you get on the freeway, you may get rear-ended, but you get on the freeway because the probability is very low. We are to be vigilant, to be on guard, and to know that once something awful happens, it can happen again, and yet not to overreact. And there's one more piece, and I say this with the greatest hope of self-restraint, and that's another concept that Daniel Kahneman helped highlight, and that's called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias means that you already have an idea of what you want to be true, and you only read what confirms it. That's the source of anti-Semitism. If you think that Jews are bad, you only look for evidence that would feed into it. In Yiddish, there's a saying, a half-truth is a whole lie. You can find lots of half-truths. And those half-truths are used more in recent years against globalists. Code word for Jews. Not a code word for everybody, but a code word to those who are hateful on the right. That has been how Jews have been referred to throughout the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. Those who are not loyal, who are other, who are rich, who are at the same time socialists, who want to bring in foreigners to undermine the nature of America. When they marched in Charlottesville and they chanted, "The Jews will not replace us." What do you mean? We're only 2% of the population. How are we going to replace those people? Do you know what that meant? It meant that Jews are the ones who welcome in the stranger. It is Jews with their organizations like HIAS who support those immigrants. And it is Jews, rich Jews, who pay for the caravan. And some of those Jews who people know almost nothing about or distorted things about are willing to believe it because of confirmation bias. It's what you want to believe, which is that we are in danger. And those others, those Jews, they're the ones who are looking to change who we are. But we do it too. And that's where I want to be emotionally balanced. We each do it, but do it differently, and it's not a level playing field. Heaven knows. There is truth and there are lies. A half-truth is a whole lie, but we must all be on guard. from our own lives, within our own community, and to ourselves, that would see the other in ways that are other, that are fearful. America has a right to keep its borders closed, as does anybody in their home. You can choose who comes into your home. And yet at the same time, if you have a home in which you don't let people in because of their skin color or because of where they were born, how unfair and how narrow. I'm talking about your own home. And this country, this great country that allowed in our ancestors, that allowed in my parents who had no high school education, who did not speak English, and who were the refuse of refugee, who didn't talk about it because they didn't want to be labeled. Because America is a nation of immigrants, and we have laws that allow for asylum of refugees. And so, to pull this together, we mourn. We mourn our people's loss, for we are an extended family. We mourn those Jews, those 11 Jews who were the early ones, 9:45 in the morning. They were the first to come to shul, the ones who were the greeters, who were the Torah readers, the ones who were the foundation of the core. They're the ones who were slain, who were murdered last Saturday. And we on this Shabbat feel vulnerable. For it happened there, it could happen here. And that is true. And we must be vigilant. But we must be vigilant with respect for the other too. We must welcome those who come to support us, knowing how blessed we are to live in America, in a country in which overwhelmingly people seek to respect the other. We are a country of equality, of freedom, of opportunity. I do not take America for granted, nor should any of us. This is a moment to pause and to say thank you to the founders of this nation, to the leaders of this nation who allow us to live as we do with open hearts at home. The last time I asked us to rise to sing with our flag unfurled was in the passing of John McCain, Senator McCain, who represented for me, for many of us, the best of America, a willingness to serve our country as his father and grandfather had served, a willingness to try and carve out that middle, doing what he felt was right to secure the safety of America and the liberty of America. And when he passed and was honored on that Shabbat, people from the entire political spectrum united to pay him tribute. And so we sang the national anthem in his honor. On page 453 is America the Beautiful. That Shabbat Mark Kerner led us. And so in a moment we will rise in order to value the gifts we have by this nation. May we Jews not suffer more from anti-Semitism. Heaven knows we've suffered enough. And may we Jews not allow anti-Semitism against other Jews. Damn it. With half-truths. There are political divisions. May we rise above them to see the goodness in each other, to respect each other, knowing that we want the best for America from each other. Let us see each other with respect, for that's the starting point for building and rebuilding a nation that is America. Ribono Shel Olam, may I be centered, may we be centered, may we not live in fear, and may we live with gratitude, and may that gratitude allow us to be steady in seeing the goodness in our fellow Jews of all political orientations. And may we respect each other. And may we respect other Americans, regardless of their political orientation, finding and trusting that they too honor the idea that is America, a nation of the home of the brave, of those who are at home in a nation of equality, of freedom, of the religion, of the press, and of all those who are different, that they are not different, but created in the image of God. May we so shine your light, our Creator. Amen. We rise, page